Page 35, Festive Dance. This is in the key of D minor, like the last one was. One flat, all B's are flatted. It is a dance. It's in the name, duh, okay. Festive means, I suppose it's happy. Well, it's allegro. Allegro means fast, that's the speed. So I guess it's happy. At the beginning, you have 3 notes that are slurred and then 2 staccato notes. And hopefully by now the dotted rhythms are not causing you problems. If they are, please go back through book 1 again and get them to wherever the dotted rhythms are. You gotta get dotted rhythms. I mean, there's just no way around them. They're all over the place. So it's 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So I'm hoping you got dotted rhythms. I'm after this slurring staccato stuff. You slur it and then staccato. Next measure, same thing. Third measure, look at the fingering. It's 1 2 1. Just cross over. This is very common. You got to be able to do that. It shouldn't be too difficult for you to just collapse the thumb a little bit. Don't bring the elbow out or twist, do any of this fancy stuff. No, it's just simple, come over. In the second line, you got to move up, because we're here at the end of the first line, then you got to go up to here. It's between phrases, so you're going to lift up anyway. So as you lift up and come down, you just move over a little bit. Third measure, you got to cross over to put the second finger on the E. You don't really have to cross over because it's a staccato on the F with the thumb, so you can just move. Staccato there. I like the fingering in the last measure of the second line. That's what I'm preaching anyway, because the whole thing together in that measure, well, all you gotta do is add the A, and you have a D minor chord in extended position. That's the fingering for it. We're just not using the A. So that's the fingering we use in the piece if we can. You can't always do that, but do it if you can. Third line. Now you're moving again, but you got a quarter rest at the end of the second line, so you got time to come up here. However, look at the third line, second measure. You're coming from this in the first measure to this in the second measure. Now again, you're just lifting up and moving over. The pedal will help you connect the notes. So I don't care for the fingering, I'm not going to do anything with it. Just then back down. And then they want you to do a third finger on here. Well, we can adjust that a little bit, let you explore a little bit. I want to show you something is what I want to show you. Third measure, third line. You're starting out here. If you'd play the second half note with 2 4, and you'll run across that from time to time, you're in position for the next measure. And then the last line. And again, the last line, third measure, the first half notes 1 3, the second half notes 2 4, and then you're in position. I think that works out great. You got to keep in mind this is a fast piece, so whatever fingering you're using has to work at a fast tempo. A lot of times the fingerings we work out work fine at a slow tempo, but then when we go to speed them up, it doesn't work. It just, everything falls apart. Well, not everything, but enough. So we have to keep that in mind. Left hand, there is a note underneath the staff at the beginning of this for LH staccato, meaning left hand staccato, meaning they just didn't want to put in the dots. But when you get this pattern, pedal or not, when you get this pattern, play it staccato. The technique is staccato. It's just a nice light. You can use an arm staccato or a wrist staccato. It's up to you, but keep it light. I find a wrist staccato works better. In the second line, the half notes are not staccato. The quarter notes are, except for the last measure. That's not staccato. But for the third and fourth lines, even with the pedal, still do staccato in the left hand. The technique is staccato. You have articulation. I talked about the slurs and the staccato. Now, also the accents. The accents can be kind of important. Third and fourth lines down, you're accenting the half notes, which means just give them a little extra oomph. Boom, 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 boom. Isn't that fun? I like the boom, so it's okay. The crescendo and decrescendo, you can do that. There's not a lot of difference between a mezzo forte and a forte, or a medium loud and a loud, not a lot. So like in the first line and the third measure, when you have that pin, that hairpin, we call them hairpins, to get louder, there's not a lot of difference. So what I tend to do is I'll come down a little bit at the beginning of the hairpin so I got more room to get louder. So instead of starting the third measure at mezzo forte, I might start it at mezzo piano and then come back up. It's just a very short period of time it's at mezzo piano, so the ear tends to focuses more on the crescendo than it does the fact that I got a little too soft. And that's typical. But in the second line, when you're going to decrescendo, you're loud, but they don't tell you how soft to get. You can go all the way down to soft here if you want. And then that last measure, you can play that medium soft. Then the second one, you can do loud again if you want. But you have to plan it out. So it's like in the second line, in the first measure, you're loud. In the second measure, bring it down a little bit. The third measure, bring it down a little more. And then just bring it all the way down. And then come back up. Yay. I mean, it is accented at the end there. You know? And the pedal's down. It's going to help reinforce it. Speaking of pedal, let's talk about it. So in the second line, when you're using it, I would recommend pushing the pedal down right after you play the notes, like in the first measure. Lift them up when you play the third beat so we hear the staccato. And in the last measure, you push it down right after you play the notes. And you lift it up on beat 4 with the hands. They all come up at once. Then in the third line, actually it'd be the third and fourth line, both work the same way. You're going to push the pedal out after you play the notes. Then, according to what they're saying, you would lift it up right after you play the notes in the next measure. So you connect the sound. Now you can experiment here and see what you like, because you can lift the pedal up right before you play the notes in the next measure, so you get a little silence, so it's like a break in a phrase. Do you like that better or not? It's up to you. But there's a repeat sign at the end of the second line, so we're going to play the first 2 lines twice. Then when you get down to the bottom, there's a DC al fine. Remember that? DC means go back to the beginning and go to fine. Fine is at the end of the second line. So when you get down at the bottom, you go back up and you play the first 2 lines again. Now when you're on a DC or a DS or whatever, you do not do any repeats. Skip those. Those are only good for the first time through. So after we DC back to the beginning, we are not doing the repeat again at the end of the second line. No. Once we get to the end of the second line, we're done. That's it. Fine. Finished. Kaput. That's about all I had to say about this puppy. Let's try this out. 4/4 time, I'll give us 4 counts, and we are going slow. You can do the happy, fast stuff on your own. Well, I'll do slow here. I want you to hear the notes. The melody's in the right hand, or the top note of the right hand, so bring that out if you can, because it makes a difference. Look at this. If I do them both the same, like a lot of people would do, the first. And it's just, and I've heard teachers play like that. So keep the left hand soft. Even with the right hand getting louder, keep the left hand soft. There are times when you'll let the accompaniment get a little louder, but really the dynamic is for the melody. And so the accompaniment, it only gets louds and softs as it needs to support the melody. You have to experiment and decide. In this piece, I'll keep the left hand soft throughout the whole thing. So let's try this out slowly. I'll give us 4 counts and we'll see what happens. Right hand here, left hand, foot's on the pedal. Here we go. 1, 2, ready and go, and. Beginning